Good evening. If you're anything like me, you suffer a little bit from imposter syndrome. I'm a member, I've been a long-time member. I always listen to people's talks. I always think, I can't really do that. I'm sure I can. Every time I open my mouth, my coworkers are happy because I teach them stuff. So something I do at work, I'm a pre-sales engineer with Micro Focus. I've been working with Fortify security testing tools since 2004. Recently passed my 15-year anniversary or so. Multiple corporations, we're going to soon be open text. So in dealing with our products, we use APIs to drive our security testing tools. So not only can you sit there with your laptop and do your security testing, you can use the API and just automate it. And so that's the big thing today. Everybody likes to talk about DevOps. DevOps generally makes use of pipelines, and pipelines generally run command line scripts, and those command line scripts are usually talking to APIs. And so by course of that, I had to teach myself Postman. So you may not even know what Postman is. I did not know what it was 2 years ago, and a year ago I didn't know what I'm going to share today. So Postman, inside joke, in HTTP traffic we've got gets and posts and deletes, and these are all actions and verbs that normally occur, and so therefore the name Postman. So Postman is a free tool, but I'm going to back up a little bit first. We're going to talk about API security, nothing fancy. I deal with web security only. So I don't do network stuff anymore. I don't do management or identity management or anything like that. I'm just supposed to know about it. So my specialty is just web traffic. And I love web traffic because it's plain text. The problem with APIs is that they are not for humans. So if we step back a little bit, everybody has heard the FUD, right? APIs, you got to do your security testing. It's just like back in the day when everybody wanted to get rid of Java and JavaScript, and they wanted to go to Ajax. Ajax was going to solve all their problems. But it really was the same problems in a new clothing. So I think with APIs, we essentially are trying to get away from web securities by introducing new web securities. So OWASP has a nice project. It's a little outdated. They're trying to do like a top 10 list for API security issues. They've got a variety of lists, and some are more outdated than others. But this seems to be a focus today. Your management might be talking about what do we do to secure our APIs, when at the moment they don't know what an API is. So we're going to cover that briefly. All right. API is just a web service. So way back in the day, we had SOAP web services, right? If you know anything about dealing with SOAP web services, they generally didn't show you anything on the browser screen. So if you had to work with them, it was annoying. You had to use an intercept proxy, and you had to tinker with fields individually. And if you didn't get the fields just right, you got the big no. So like if you put in the wrong value, you get an error message saying that's not a proper PO number. So you'd have to have the right formats for your testing values, and QA people know all about this. They usually have a big library of dummy values that they use for their testing. They rarely hand that over to the security team. So when the security team's job is to scan, let's say, a SOAP project, they hammer it with default values and they get nothing back because the SOAP or the API or the web service will only talk back to you when you speak its language. It asks for 3 inputs. You have to give it those 3 inputs. Only then will it answer you, right? So somehow you have to know these details. And that was the aggravating thing with SOAP web services, was that they weren't well documented sometimes. And so it was a challenge to know which fields were required, which ones were not, right? And also the formatting. And this was all just to crawl and visit the page before you even start trying to do injection attacks against those inputs. So a challenge for web security. So an application programming interface, and again, there's multiples. You have SOAPs, RPCs, rarely seen today, WebSockets on the edges, but REST seems to be the big one that most people will talk about. And the reason being is that tools like Swagger and Postman have come along making working with those simpler. So there's multiple types. Swagger is like a mechanism or a definition way of formulating a standard for REST. OpenAPI is another one, OData. There are others out there. So when we talk about REST, what it means is it's just a way to do that communication similar to SOAP, where there are certain actions that can be done by the browser when it makes that call inbound. Now this is session state free, meaning there's no information kept between requests. You send a request, the very next one, the server doesn't know that you're the same person that just made the prior request. It's stateless. So these are all defined in here, and everything has to be handled precisely. And if it's not precisely done, then the trouble is you get nothing back or you get an error message back. And that's your daily business is testing these things out. So REST has become more and more popular because of its flexibility and also because of some features that have been added to make the documentation and understanding what those endpoints are asking you for easier to understand. All right, so Swagger is a pseudo standard that REST people can use when they're setting up their application. They can say, we're going to do it in a Swagger methodology. And what this means is that the Swagger technology does self-documenting. Self-documenting means, lo and behold, it'll spit out a little side web page where a human can go through and read the stuff, not just a computer. Because truthfully, APIs are for bots to talk to bots. We're not supposed to be in the conversation. And this makes it really, really challenging when they first came out with these, because functional testing, your developers were like, well, I've made it, but to test it, I have to create a Python script that makes all these HTML calls and hit send, and if I get a 200 OK, then it's good. And then they had to do this one by one by one, and then they grew libraries, and it just became a mess. And again, when they tossed it over the wall to the security team to do a test before pre-release, they don't instruct the security team how to test it, or even how to negotiate it, much less how to log into it, right? So fun times. But what Swagger can do is it can read through the definition of the API and spell out an entire syntax tree of all the endpoints and all the values and what's acceptable in all of those, making it therefore much easier to then run tests against your endpoints. Now, to do this, we use a definition file. In this case, JSON is very, very common. You have YAMLs as well. Basically, it's a document that describes what does this API program do and what does it not do, right? It's limited. It might do just one thing and return a list of books. It might do a thing like list a number of customers or the number of vulnerabilities on the last release or other things of that nature. So this is what we call the definition file. I'm sorry for speed, nerves. So now reading it. This is a non-browser browser thingy. So how in the world do we mess with it? Back to the JSON file. So the JSON file is an open standard. It's a JavaScript object notation. And I've been told it can be pronounced JSON or JSON. So it's your choice, whichever you're familiar with. Now, it's sort of the vendor's choice when they're setting up their application as to whether they're going to use this standard or not. But again, it's becoming very common. And the reason being is it will frequently spit out an easy-to-read definition. And so this then allows easier testing, an easier understanding of the scope of the testing of that application. This is what JSON file looks like. Rather hideous. This is in a browser. Okay? So if you go to, in this case, it's a SaaS environment that I have at work. If I log in, I can go and look at the JSON file raw. This is what the computers read. I can't read this. This makes no sense to me. So instead, what's really beautiful about Swagger, you notice this at the end where it's got the Swagger and this is the documentation. I can come to the human readable form, the UI. This spells out the endpoints. So each one of these is a different endpoint with a series of actions that it can do, and that's all it does. So one of these is to run a dynamic security scan. Again, that's our product that we work with. So if I want to run a security test of a website, I can call this endpoint, and provided I give it all the right inputs, it'll go off and do a security scan. Do I want to look up the event logs? Do I want to do a mobile scan? Do I need to double check attributes that I've defined in my projects in this SaaS environment? Each one of these endpoints does a series of actions along those lines. Let me see. All right, if I pull that up. Oh, logged off. Oh joy, this will be fun. All right. this is an application. This is the SaaS environment I spoke of. Come over here and I can look at the API Explorer. And again, human readable form. I can actually put an access token up here. Or instead, I can click on this and it can just ask me for my username and my password and I can log in. With APIs, because they're stateless, we can do a trick called using a bearer token. A bearer token is a header in the HTTP traffic that is like your secret code that you've been logged in. So usually the first request you make is to authenticate to the API. It gives you a bearer token. And then that becomes a shared secret between you and the server. So with every request you then make to the other endpoints, you just include that bearer token. And it's like your username and password credentials in one. And as long as that HTTP request has that bearer token and the server still accepts it as valid, then it will answer any of the endpoints that you call. This is called, this is what happens with websites. You log in and then it gives you a cookie, and then the cookie is transferred back and forth by your browser in real time to maintain your session state. So that's how we do it with this. So if I authenticate, it'll give me a bearer token, and then behind the scenes, everything that I request down below will carry that bearer token, so I'll still be logged in. So if I come to look at attributes, or show hide, there's only one thing there. If I want to look at applications, applications are what we call our projects. So if you have your favorite project, you'll have your project and you'll have multiple builds inside of it, and each build can be scanned and the test results are all there. So different endpoints. Over on the right, it gives me a little bit of English explaining what the endpoint does for me. So if I want to update one of my application project definitions, I can do it using this endpoint here. You'll notice it has a little variable here in parentheses, brackets. And so this shows me the format of my API call that I'm going to have to make. It's going to have to be a put to the service address, followed by that URL with the ID number of the application that I want to affect. And then I'm going to have to include some JSON body with some special strings in it that are going to be pushed. And it's going to say, I want this stuff to be created as a new application, or I want to do this to this application number. Again, this is a one-trick pony. That's all this endpoint does. Applications. If I want to look at releases, I want to kick off a new release. Show hide. So if I want to create a brand new release in my tenant, my web tenant, I would have to make a post to this address with the following information. And it's going to have to include the release ID number that I want to use. And actually that's coming back. The parameters are below. This is where it gets really nice sometimes with Swagger. This actually shows me on the left side in white the request I'm going to make. On the right-hand side here, it shows me some samples. And if I click on that, it fills it in for me. I can choose what type of traffic I'm going to send this as, typically application JSON for this one. I can choose to keep or to remove some of these entries. So I can come in and do something like this. Provided I've provided string values, I have to fill these in all on my own. And then what's nice is if I were logged in, down below, there's a try it out button. I click try it out. It shows me a sample of what this looks as a curl command. Step back a moment. How many people have used curl or know what curl is? All right, it's like a command line browser, so to speak. Anyway, this is a sample of how you would make this precise JSON call to this one endpoint exactly with the values that you plugged in. What's beautiful about that is you can copy and paste that into Jenkins. And now you've got a Jenkins job that will trigger that, will do that thing for you. Here's the URL, response body. Unfortunately, I didn't fill out the values properly. I got a 401. Scratch your head, go back to where you were before. As nice as this is not wonderful. But what's great is I can get the raw JSON. Again, our friend, hideous looking. Click in there, Control Save. I can choose to save this as a JSON definition file. This leads to what tool am I going to go take this? I can then carry this over to Postman. I can import it, and all that juicy information that was in my browser is now inside of Postman ready for me to tinker with. So just wanted to show that entry, what it looks like live. This is another product that we have. It's a local scanner that runs on my laptop. It also provides its own Swagger API. This is ostensibly for running a poor man's automation through this one little laptop. So basically it's a listener, and it's waiting for commands. And that's the definition file. This is what it looks like in human readable format. It has a couple collections of endpoints. The primary one for me is usually a scanner. Start a scan, halt a scan, check the status of my scan, things of that nature. Proxy is cool because sometimes you don't want to scan the entire website. Sometimes you only want to scan a portion of it. And the way most scanner tools will work is they prefer to take a proxy capture and use that to drive them. So they don't crawl the entire website. They just go after the one area you were interested in. So what I've had people do as a poor man's version is they'll call the API, they'll contact the proxy endpoint, and they'll say, spawn a new listener on port 9000. Then what they'll do is they'll go over their favorite functional testing tool, Selenium, and they'll run a functional test script through that proxy. When they're done, they come back to the endpoint, and they call the endpoint that says, save the proxy traffic as a new macro. And then they call another endpoint that says, kill the proxy endpoint that we created earlier. So now there's no more listener. Then they call the scanner and they say, hey scanner, I want you to run a workflow-driven scan using the macro we just generated on the fly. And so now I have a short, agile security test scan of my website by calling 4 different endpoints. So the first one was create the listener, save the capture, kill the listener, launch a scan. So that can be done as a script. So this is beautiful, but still difficult because there's a lot here that you have to look through and read. Here's a common one that's used for many people when they're learning Swagger. It's called the Pet Store application. So this is a free open project where you're welcome to visit it. This is Swagger 2.0. It's a sample server, pet store server. And they have basic things like looking up pets and purchasing a toy and things of that nature. Again, human readable form, a lot prettier. Now this is version 2. In the Swagger format, they have another one in OData format that is version 3, I think. But you can see the endpoints. This one is if you want to upload an image of your pet, if you want to add a new pet to the store, if you want to update an existing pet, or if you want to delete one. You get the idea. Each one of these endpoints is a one-trick pony. It only does one thing. And again, they're very specific about what information you send to them and request for them. So let's talk about Postman then. So Postman, it has included training. There's a public website there. So you can take the long route and learn everything, or you can stand on my shoulders like some of my coworkers do, because I love to document stuff. And so I stuff it in SharePoint. And we keyword search it, and then we look like experts. So in computing, a post is an HTTP method. So that's the inside joke of Postman. The beauty of this is that it's a local web application, or you can run it on Windows as an application. It is free. And what this allows you to do is you can run a collection or individual HTTP requests against anything you like, really, but primarily APIs. You can use secrets and variables to streamline your projects. You can export what you've done into multiple languages. So this is where, once you figure out how it works in Postman, you can output it as a Python script and send it over to whomever is running the CI circle pipelines, and they want to be able to do what you just did. So you expand it. You take it off your laptop, move it up. And again, so Windows app, and you can also collaboratively share your collections with coworkers, either by manually exporting, and then they can import your collection to their system, or I believe Postman website allows you to have like a team, and you can log in together, and you can share one another's libraries of collections directly. Again, free. So you get all the core tooling and collaboration for up to 3 users. I don't even use the collaboration. And then, of course, the larger you go. We have there's large numbers of QA teams that depend on Postman today to create these collections. It's gotten so much that in the security field, people say, how are you going to scan our APIs? And we're like, do you test with Postman? And they say, yes. We said, we can consume your Postman collection directly into our scanner. End of story. All right, so quick little review. Session state is maintained using bearer tokens. So those are little headers that have to be included in the traffic. The collection is one or more requests. So I'll show you some samples of those. It can be a single endpoint or it can be a series of them. And what's beautiful is you can get them to run in series by clicking one button. Remember those 4 requests I talked about? You can just create a collection and say go, and it runs all 4 of actions one after the other. Environments. Everybody hates to show their password and their bearer token and stuff, so it allows you to do what's called an environment. An environment is just where you define your variables and your secrets. So in your collection, it just shows a variable name, like Hans's password. But in the environment, I can put Hans's password. Now, when I export this and send it to you, you don't see anything but Hans's password, right? So then you know you have to replace that with your password in your own environment variable. Automation. The collection can be run individual requests one by one, or you can just say run the whole collection once everything's copacetic and working really smoothly. Tests. This is a post-request action. This is important. Remember I talked about the first request being, I'm going to request my bearer token? Well, all the requests after that have to know the bearer token. And since the bearer token is random, I don't want to have to type it in real fast, right? So instead what I do is I do a post-request action to snatch the bearer token value from the response, put it into a variable, and the variable is used throughout all the rest of the requests down below. So that just daisy chains my whole collection in one. And then exports. I can export this. It exports into, again, JSON format. I send that over to somebody and say, here's that collection to show you how to do it. And I do this all the time with customers for use cases. So let's see what a use case looks like there. Do a duplicate. Yeah, let's see what it's got in here for me. Oh, it won't do that. Okay. Much better. All right, so if I go back to look at, and again, this is not to teach you Postman tonight. Too much time's going by. I think I've got, 11 minutes? So we can go into more in depth at some other point. So Postman, again, it's a browser environment. I've got collections. I've got APIs. These are entire collections that I've sucked into my process here. And then environments. These are environment variables that I've created. So when I'm working with the WebInspect API, I use this environment collection. When I'm using the SaaS solution, FOD, I use this collection. What's in this? If I look over at these values, all right, I've got my release ID, I've got Hans's, my API key, I got my scan ID, I've got different variables that I've put in here. There's the bearer token, there's the password, there's something over here. That's not the password today. I got my API key for this particular application inside of our SaaS environment. So again, these are my secrets. And then this is my collection, whole bunch of them. I've got one here for a Shepherd application. All right, so this is a basic application project that we have called Shepherd. It's an open source project. We use it as a dummy for demonstrations. So we'll load it up and we'll scan it with our product and we'll show you the vulnerabilities associated with it. What I've done here is I've said, I'm going to take this project a level further. Let me promote this project. I had a customer whose use case was every day they have a new build and they scan the build, but they don't want to find the defects that were found in yesterday's build. So to do that, we have to do what's called copy state. I need to copy the prior test results from yesterday's build into today's build as they're promoting it. And that way, anything they marked as false positive is still marked as false positive in the new one. So this is their use case. In addition, they have everything marked as dev, 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 but then they want to promote it periodically. A really good one, they want to promote it to production. And it's going to go into pre-release. So they're going to retest it one more time, and if it's good, then that one goes live, right? So this action was, how do I create a new build for today and promote it to production, right? I think they were using ServiceNow, and they were putting this all behind a little button. So they created a button in ServiceNow that says promote project, and they had to put the name of the project, and they click it, and it would do this behind the scenes. But first they needed the use case. They said, I don't understand your API, how do I do this? So what I do is the first one is to authenticate. You'll notice it uses bearer token, and I just say here. So when I'm looking at this, I had to build this from scratch. So I had to create a post, I had to put in the URL, I also had to go into the body, and I had to put in the correct format, form data. I had to put in my client ID number and my secret, and notice I've got variables in place of actual ones here, right? And this only works if I set my working environment at the top to the appropriate environment. So the environment tells me things like, what is my host URL? Because this allows me to send this to you, and you just replace that variable value with your host URL instead of my host URL. But provided it's the same application, it'll behave the same. I go ahead and hit send. It's sending an HTTP traffic to the web, and then this is the response I got back. There's my access token, that big gobbledygook. Next, I need to go over to putting some information up. I'll look at the body here. This is the get. This calls the releases. It filters by the application names, Shepherd, release name, blah, 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 number 7. All right, this is all like background information of how this endpoint works. It's back in the definition. Now, in this case, there's nothing in the response body, request body, and I just hit send. Now, the trouble is my authorization. How do I log in? I'm going to have to copy that bearer token value, and I need to paste it into that field. Or I got smart and I put a variable in it. So there's my bearer token value right there. It's already carried over for me. I hit send, and there's my list of my release number 7. Next one, I want to make a copy of that. Now this one, the copy is a post, and in the post data, it has certain select fields I have to put in there. I have to put in the base application that I'm copying from. I have to put in the new release name and the new release description that I'm going to use for it, and whether or not I want to do copy state. And then I also need to know which release I'm copying it from. So also, I'm setting its SDLC status from dev to production. So this is my promotion, right? I'm doing in one action. And you notice this is release number 9 that we're creating, and it's dated today. And it was true, so that's sent over there. And then, of course, they had a final request that they needed to do, which was to grab some summary information about the new project release that they just created. What does this look like on the other end as a human user? Go back into my system. All right, find Shepherd. This one. All right, I'm looking at the Shepherd application. If I scroll down, I'm looking for release 9. So this was just created here today, and it already has issues. They were copied from release 8. So I copied release 8 into this one. And so release 8 already had 144 critical findings in it and blah, blah, blah. So I could have done that by hand. It would have been painful. But instead, I created this little script. What's nice about this up here is there are abilities to share this collection with another friend. I can fork it and start doing sub breakdowns of it. If everything is working the way that I like, I can also come back and individually, I can come over and look at code. So this request, this post with this information, this doesn't help my friend who doesn't have Postman. He prefers Python. So I'm going to come over here and choose HTTP Python client, and I can send him all this, and it does the same action that I just did in Postman. If I don't like that, I can instead say I want it in curl format. Boom, it rearranges it all in curl format. Come back down, somebody has a favorite, C libcurl. Again, complete gobbledygook to me. I don't know that language at all, but I can get a working call and ship it to somebody else, and they can be happy with it. When you're done with this completely, you can also just say, I'd like to share the entire collection. So with individual people, and I can spit it out as a JSON file. Now, where did I get all this definition details? Initially, 2 years ago, I started doing this. I would build them by hand. So I would look at that web browser interface, and it was a get. So I'd type get. And then I would come up there, and I'd say, OK, now, what's the URL I need? So I'd put the URL in there. And then I had to get that information out of that yellow box and paste it there. And then I had to start tinkering with the values and figure out what worked and what didn't work. And it was painful. Instead, there's this beautiful feature that allows me to simply suck in an entire JSON definition file. So I can just go import, choose the file, go to, where did I keep that? Of course, it's under temp, right? All right, so the pet store definition Swagger file, I've already downloaded that. It's available in the browser. Go ahead and open that up. Show some import settings. Now, when we're looking at our Swagger page, we have these things look all pretty and nice, and they're broken out according to their headers. But if instead, we could just use them by their URL. So the URLs don't quite match the prettiness that we have here, okay? And they're organized a little bit differently. If we want to keep it the pretty way, when we do the import, the one thing you want to watch for is your folder organization. If you keep it as paths, you'll get the raw path, and that's how it'll be organized in your site tree in Postman. Instead, I'm going to do tags. So it'll match the prettiness that I'm looking at. And just like that, I pulled in the entire Swagger definition file. And if I expand this, these are all the endpoints waiting for me. There's the post for uploading an image. There's the post for a new pet. And there's a put for updating an existing pet. And so instead of having to recreate the wheel, let's see, come up and say uploads an image. This is what it takes to upload an image. It's got some dummy values in here, a little Latin. But this gives me the structure I need. It gives me the URL, the post. Some of the form data is filled out ahead of time. So this is beautiful. And now I can build off of this. I can simply come over here and say duplicate. And so now I have a copy. And then I can take the copy somewhere else, and I can build just a new collection that only has that request in it, or a handful of other requests. And so now I can tinker with that some. So that's the process that you're looking at. And then one sample I did not show was the post-scan requests. I call them post requests. After I made the very first request, that authentication, there's a test. And what the test does is it says var data, JSON. I'm going to parse the response body. I'm going to look for an environment variable. I'm going to create an environment variable called FOD bearer token. And I'm going to snatch whatever shows up in the data that's called access token. What that looks like is it reads through all of this in the response. It sees this, and it grabs that. Now, console log is a little extra trick. When it comes to testing these out, it's always good to have an error log. And so that's what the console log forwards you off to the side. When you run these, the console log will show you do capture requests, and it'll start capturing requests. Actually, that's a different feature. So those are the basics of using Postman to tinker with APIs and the ability to bring in somebody else's work and also to then push it out to other people and share with them. This is actually an additional new feature that I came across. It's a lot more awesome. This one allows you to just browse an endpoint, and it captures everything in there because sometimes you don't want to build 72 different requests. Sometimes it's easier just to record 72 requests and then maybe tweak them a little bit. And so that's what this feature, the Start Capture feature, does. Again, this is free. I didn't even have to register for this. So there you go, free tools, and you can start learning a little about APIs using the Pet Store application. And again, on their website, the Postman has wonderful stuff such as Explore, and they have entire coursework with videos and with breakouts of the videos so that you can work alongside of them. And I think that was everything that I was doing today. So again, I apologize. You end up with a lot in your head, and then like, how do I synthesize this down? I hope this was helpful as an introduction to APIs and using Postman. And hopefully you understand why it might be useful for security people like us. All right, thank you.
Thank you.